Number 1.
For Jen Powell, the years have not healed the loss she feels, and the questions she has about the disappearance of her son John Weisbecker from their Ocean City home in 2009 still remain. And no one seems to know anything. I heard from the police on the 10-year anniversary of John's disappearance, Powell, 55, who moved from her Ocean City home in 2010, said in an interview Friday. They usually call each year. They say they are looking into it. I just feel like I will never know. That is the hardest part. March 11 will mark 12 years since Weisbecker vanished from the home he shared with his mother and sister, Jordan, at 205 Asbury Avenue. He was 21 years old, 6'2" with brown hair, a mustache and blue eyes. He also had numerous tattoos on his torso and arms at the time he just vanished. Police believe someone else was with Weisbecker at the house. They said there were signs of a struggle inside the home the day he vanished, including overturned furniture. They believe he did not go willingly. A postal worker saw Weisbecker that morning. And year after year, there are no real leads. There are no answers. No one has seen the 2006 Ocean City High School graduate. On Friday, Ocean City Public Information Officer Doug Bergen said he spoke with Police Chief Jay Prettyman regarding the case. Unfortunately, there are no new developments to report at this time, Bergen said. In 2016, Ocean City Police turned to a Facebook page to begin soliciting tips about Weisbecker's disappearance. In addition, a $50,000 reward is being offered for information about his whereabouts. Powell holds on to hope that someday someone will come forward with information about her son's disappearance. I know the officers weren't happy because they think somebody knew something, Powell said of the initial police work on the case. I feel that way too. I know it hurts them just as much that they couldn't get the answers. She is thankful for her daughter, Jordan, 29, a married mother of 2, who lives out of state. Powell continues on for them. You have to keep going, she said. I have a 4-year-old grandson and 2-year-old granddaughter. But all the birthdays, family gatherings and other milestone events are without Powell's son and Jordan's big brother. He missed his sister's graduation, her marriage, her 2 babies, Powell said, holding back sobs. And as the years go by, Weisbecker's friends who once kept in touch with Powell have stopped. I don't hear from any of them now, said Powell, who lives in a town in the area but did not wish for it to be publicly disclosed. It's been too long. He had one friend who knocked on the door that day. He was one of the only ones who kept in touch for a bit, and he passed away. Powell wants answers. As a mother, she said, she needs them. The hardest thing is not knowing, Powell said as her voice cracked, and she began to sob. There is a $50,000 reward for anyone who provides information about John's whereabouts. If you have any information that could help the investigation, please contact the FBI Newark Division at 973-792-3000.
Number 2.
When Toni Davis went to bed on a Sunday night 8 years ago, she did so peacefully, without a hint anything was wrong. But when the Gastonia woman woke up on April 20, 2009, and discovered a locked bedroom door, that all changed. Missing from her room was Priti Ashley Porter, Davis's then 22-year-old daughter. A screen sat on the floor, removed from the window it typically covers. Porter's money, cell phone, purse and belongings were left behind. Davis, thinking the best, determined that maybe Porter had left on her own and forgot to call. The mother waited another week before she called police. The 2007 Ashbrook High graduate hasn't been seen since. And as the calendar flips to April each year, Davis is reminded that a piece of her remains missing. That's the worst thing anybody wants to do, is lose their child, Davis said. It's just one thing you don't want to do. For 3 years, Davis barely touched her daughter's old room. At any moment she could return, she thought, and besides the room carried memories that were tough to process. She says Porter was well-behaved growing up and respected house rules. Her family says she found consistent work and manufacturing jobs. "I could be a good friend, but there's a respect that I'm her mother," Davis said. "If she drank, she did that somewhere else. If she smoked, she did it somewhere else. She didn't do that around me." Davis has kept much of Porter's old belongings, but as life went on the room's purpose changed. Porter's younger brother, Chauncey McKinney, fathered a daughter 2 years ago. The young child now spends much of her time in Porter's old room. "I want to believe she's still out there," McKinney said. "I don't want to think somebody did something to her. I miss her. I love her." Out of fear of jeopardizing the investigation, Gastonia police have revealed little information about the case. Porter's disappearance was initially characterized on police reports as not a crime, missing person. But Gastonia police spokeswoman Donna Losser says foul play is suspected. All Davis knows for sure is that the family went to church together that morning. They had dinner together that night before Porter logged onto Mispus and went to talk with a neighbor. By 10 p.m., she was back home to tell her mother good night. Davis is tight-lipped about who could have lured her daughter outside of her bedroom that night. But she said Porter did have an ex-boyfriend who was abusive, an ex-boyfriend who was not welcome in or near her Windy Hill Drive home. "It kinda makes you think," Davis said. "Was it somebody who was not comfortable with knocking at my door, ringing my doorbell, that they would go to the window to get her attention instead of coming to the door? It's not normal, no, for her to go out the window. But with the knowledge that I didn't want this person around, they must not have felt comfortable enough to knock on the door. Until her family gets answers, it's impossible to know whether Ashley Porter is alive today." That not knowing, Davis says, has been a tough pill to swallow. Prayer and time has made things easier, but it's been a difficult journey all the same. "There was a lot of counseling, meds, some terrible thoughts in my mind that I couldn't go on anymore," she said. "But I know I have Chauncey. And I have a grandchild now. If Porter is alive, her mother obviously wants her to come home. But even if she isn't, Davis pleads for a future reunion. We just want to know something," she said. "If she's no longer with us in the world, I want a place I'll be able to go and visit her and have a proper place for her to be." The initial police reports on Ashley's case initially characterized her disappearance as not a crime, missing person. However, as time passed, investigators eventually announced that they believe foul play was involved in her disappearance. Ashley's mother stated that Ashley had an ex-boyfriend who her parents did not approve of. And he was not welcome in their home. Due to this, Ashley's mother thinks it is possible that Ashley snuck out of their home that evening to meet up with him. Still, this has never been confirmed, and Gastonia police have stayed tight-lipped about the investigation into Ashley's disappearance to avoid jeopardizing the investigation. If you have any information that could help the investigation, please contact the Gastonia Police Department at 704-866-6879.
Number 3.
Toni Lee Sharpless was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a mom. After years of personal struggle, things appeared to be improving for the 29-year-old Downingtown, Pennsylvania woman. But after a tumultuous night of partying, Toni drove off into the darkness and was never seen again. Did the young nurse leave her old life behind? Did she commit suicide? Was she involved in an accident? Was she abducted? More than 10 years after her disappearance, what happened that night is still a mystery, and no one knows if Toni Lee Sharpless is alive or dead. Life hadn't always been easy for Toni. Her father died when she was just 6, but she had the love and support of her stepfather, Peter Nebel, who had been married to Toni's mom, Donna, for 21 years. Toni suffered from bipolar disorder, a condition that causes rapid mood swings. A person with bipolar disorder can be euphoric one day and suicidal the next. In severe cases, a person's mood can change in just minutes. However, Toni had been diligent about taking her medication and successfully managed her illness for a lengthy period, including through nursing school. In the past, Toni struggled with drug and alcohol abuse. People with untreated or poorly treated bipolar disorder often turn to drugs or alcohol to self-medicate. In 2008, Toni was arrested and convicted of driving while intoxicated, and in 2009 she spent a month in rehab. But those days appeared to be behind her, and Toni had found a combination of medications that successfully treated her illness. The light of Toni Sharpless's life was her 12-year-old daughter. Life as a single mom was tough, but Toni wanted to make sure her little girl had all the love and support in the world. This was no doubt Toni's primary motivation for getting clean and staying healthy. It was also her motivation for bettering herself professionally. While living with her parents and daughter in West Brandywine Township, Toni got a job as a nursing assistant at a rehabilitation center, which allowed her to save money to pursue a degree in nursing. In 2007, she achieved her goal and soon took a job at Lancaster General Hospital in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in the infectious disease ward. No matter what life threw at Toni Sharpless, she never gave up. She always fought her way back, proving that mental illness and substance abuse can be overcome and don't have to define a person. Toni Sharpless was a warrior. On August 22, 2009, Toni Sharpless was looking forward to a night out, and, boy, did she deserve it. She had plans to meet up with an old friend named Crystal Johns, which concerned Toni's family because the two women had had a falling out a decade earlier. The Nebels considered Crystal a poor influence on Toni. But on that night, the two planned to go out on the town in nearby Philadelphia. Toni wasn't the type to frequent clubs or even visit the Philadelphia area, but according to her family, Crystal talked Toni into it. Under normal circumstances, there would have been no reason for concern. But going out and partying surely meant drinking, and it's dangerous to mix alcohol with bipolar disorder medication. It's dangerous to mix alcohol with bipolar disorder, period. Toni sometimes stopped taking her medication, but as far as Donna knew, she hadn't done so in a long time. Just the morning before, Toni phoned Donna at work to ask her to check her pill bottles and call in any prescriptions she was running out of. The planned night out was cause for concern for another reason as well. At the time of her disappearance, Toni had been awake for about 36 hours. She was already running on fumes when she left with Crystal. She was also without her medication, though it's not believed that she deliberately skipped them. Like missing medication, sleep deprivation is very dangerous for someone with bipolar disorder, as it can bring on a manic episode. Combined with alcohol, it can lead to serious psychiatric problems. However, Donna Nebel says that her daughter was not manic when she walked out the door that night. Toni and Crystal were headed to Crystal's house in West Fallowfield Township, Chester County, at 9:30 p.m. that night to finish getting dressed for their big night out. The two friends hit two nightclubs, first, Ice, in King of Prussia, then, the G Lounge, in Philadelphia. Toni's daughter had trouble sleeping in the middle of the night, so she texted her mom, who texted back around 3 a.m. "I hope you can get some sleep. See you soon. Love ya, babe." At that point, both women left G Lounge and headed to a house party at the home of Philadelphia 76ers player Willie Green in Gladwine. While at the party, Toni became enraged. She reportedly believed the other partygoers were making fun of her, and she began acting erratically. Around 5 a.m., Toni and Crystal, who were heavily intoxicated by this point, were both asked to leave the home, which upset Toni even further. Crystal realized that she was the soberer of the two and tried to grab Toni's car keys, but Toni grabbed them back. As the friends left the house, a man from the party followed them outside and joked that Toni should be careful about not hitting any of the other cars. But Toni, who was now in a very fragile and manic state, didn't see the humor in it and thought he was taunting her. Toni and Crystal got in Toni's car, drove approximately 500 feet, and then Toni slammed on the brakes and ordered Crystal out of the car. Crystal did as Toni demanded and got out of the 2002 black Pontiac Grand Prix, fully expecting her friend to come back for her, but she never did. She tried to call Toni, but it went straight to voicemail. Crystal was left standing along a dark road, frightened. She was too embarrassed to go back to Willie Green's house, so she called her nephew to pick her up. She was furious. Who just kicks someone out of their car in a strange area in the dark and doesn't come back? But it wouldn't be long until her anger turned to confusion and sadness, because you see, when she watched Toni's taillights pull away in the wee morning hours, she had no idea it would be the last time she ever saw her friend. And while Crystal's behavior and the behavior of the partygoers at Willie Green's house may sound callous and uncaring, none of them knew that Toni had bipolar disorder or that she was taking heavy-duty medication for it. It wasn't information she shared with her friends. So, when Toni began acting erratically, no one understood why and chalked it up to too much alcohol. If you've ever wondered if it's possible for someone to just disappear off the face of the earth, look no further than the Toni Lee Sharpless case. When she drove off into the dark in the wee morning hours of August 23, 2009, it's as if she drove off the planet. That's why Donna and Peter Nebel have more than a few questions and doubts about what happened in the hours leading up to Toni's disappearance. A private investigator hired by the Nebels, Eileen Law, believes Crystal Johns is telling the truth about what happened the night Toni Lee Sharpless disappeared, but the Nebels aren't so sure. They had concerns the moment the two women left for the night. The Nebels have always believed that Crystal knows more than she is telling them. Even if she is telling the truth, she could have made more of an effort to keep Toni from driving, and she could have called the police to report that she was driving drunk. On the morning of the 23rd, Crystal called Toni's sister, Candy, to complain that Toni had left her behind. She said she would drop off the items that Toni had left at her house. Upon hearing that her friend never made it home, Crystal called the police, and Candy went to the West Brandywine Police Department to file a missing persons report. But some of Toni's other friends don't believe Toni would have left someone on a dark street in Philadelphia, even if she was inebriated and in a bad mental state. And they question whether Crystal would have agreed to get out of the car so quickly. Crystal has a criminal record that made the Nebels nervous, too. In 2005, she pleaded guilty to 2 counts of harassment. Peter Nebel said, "I think something went wrong at the house. If something didn't happen to Toni at Willie Green's house or in the car with Crystal, then Donna Nebel thinks there's a possibility her daughter simply got lost. Toni's daughter had trouble sleeping in the middle of the night, so she texted her mom, who texted back around 3 a.m., I hope you can get some sleep. See you soon. Love ya, babe." At that point, both women left G Lounge and headed to a house party at the home of Philadelphia 76ers player Willie Green in Gladwine. While at the party, Toni became enraged. She reportedly believed the other partygoers were making fun of her, and she began acting erratically. Around 5 a.m., Toni and Crystal, who were heavily intoxicated by this point, were both asked to leave the home, which upset Toni even further. Crystal realized that she was the soberer of the two and tried to grab Toni's car keys, but Toni grabbed them back. As the friends left the house, a man from the party followed them outside and joked that Toni should be careful about not hitting any of the other cars. But Toni, who was now in a very fragile and manic state, didn't see the humor in it and thought he was taunting her. Toni and Crystal got in Toni's car, drove approximately 500 feet, and then Toni slammed on the brakes and ordered Crystal out of the car. Crystal did as Toni demanded and got out of the 2002 black Pontiac Grand Prix fully expecting her friend to come back for her, but she never did. She tried to call Toni, but it went straight to voicemail. Crystal was left standing along a dark road, frightened. She was too embarrassed to go back to Willie Green's house, so she called her nephew to pick her up. She was furious. Who just kicks someone out of their car in a strange area in the dark and doesn't come back? But it wouldn't be long until her anger turned to confusion and sadness, because you see, when she watched Toni's taillights pull away in the wee morning hours, she had no idea it would be the last time she ever saw her friend. And while Crystal's behavior and the behavior of the partygoers at Willie Green's house may sound callous and uncaring, none of them knew that Toni had bipolar disorder or that she was taking heavy-duty medication for it. It wasn't information she shared with her friends. So, when Toni began acting erratically, no one understood why and chalked it up to too much alcohol. If you've ever wondered if it's possible for someone to just disappear off the face of the earth, look no further than the Toni Sharpless case. When she drove off into the dark in the wee morning hours of August 23, 2009, it's as if she drove off the planet. That's why Donna and Peter Nebel have more than a few questions and doubts about what happened in the hours leading up to Toni's disappearance. A private investigator hired by the Nebels, Eileen Law, believes Crystal Johns is telling the truth about what happened the night Toni Sharpless disappeared, but the Nebels aren't so sure. They had concerns the moment the two women left for the night. The Nebels have always believed that Crystal knows more than she is telling them. Even if she is telling the truth, she could have made more of an effort to keep Toni from driving, and she could have called the police to report that she was driving drunk. On the morning of the 23rd, Crystal called Toni's sister, Candy, to complain that Toni had left her behind. She said she would drop off the items that Toni had left at her house. Upon hearing that her friend never made it home, Crystal called the police, and Candy went to the West Brandywine Police Department to file a missing persons report. But some of Toni's other friends don't believe Toni would have left someone on a dark street in Philadelphia, even if she was inebriated and in a bad mental state. And they question whether Crystal would have agreed to get out of the car so quickly. Crystal has a criminal record that made the Nebels nervous too. In 2005, she pleaded guilty to 2 counts of harassment. Peter Nebel said, "I think something went wrong at the house. If something didn't happen to Toni at Willie Green's house or in the car with Crystal, then Donna Nebel thinks there's a possibility her daughter simply got lost." The man said that agents had found Toni's car parked on their lot and that agents had found someone matching Toni's description. But when investigators looked into the address and phone number provided by the caller, they discovered that they were false. Additionally, when investigators contacted the Toronto Police Department, they were told that there was no record of a woman matching Toni's description being detained or found there. West Brandywine Police Chief Walt Werner remarked, "They said it looks like a false complaint. I was pretty excited. I thought we had something going on." The guy had all the right answers. He was talking the police lingo, and he knew what to say. Just days later, an officer in West Brandywine's radio room received a call from someone claiming to be from a sheriff's deputy in South Dakota. The caller stated that officers had recovered Toni's car there. The caller promised to fax information but never did. Officers from the sheriff's department said they knew nothing of the caller or the car. The man turned out to be the same person who claimed that Toni was in Toronto. Chief Werner said, "We did get a copy of the recording. It was the exact same guy I talked to, in the call from Toronto. He had an interesting voice, just the way he sounded. Is this guy just a wacko, or does he actually know something about what happened to Toni, and he's just trying to send the police on a wild goose chase? Around the same time, Eileen and Chief Werner both received a tip from a woman who allegedly saw Toni in a reading discount grocery store. However, when investigators looked at the store's surveillance tape, they didn't spot Toni. It would not have been difficult for Toni to have been involved in a car crash in her vulnerable state, and some speculated she may have mistaken a nearby boat ramp for a road and drove her car into the Schuylkill River. A thorough search of the river discovered 12 vehicles in the water, all of them stolen, but none of them belonging to Toni. If Toni veered off the road and didn't go in the water, her car would have been found quickly, as the boat ramp is in a very populated area. Lieutenant Frank Higgins of the Township of Lower Merion Police Department explained, "There are very few areas where you cannot find a guardrail or somebody's front lawn. It's a difficult case. We're at the mercy of waiting for new news from another agency or someone else." There were a couple of hits on Sharpless's car tags in Camden, which may have come from traffic cameras. If you've never been to Camden, consider yourself lucky. It is crime central. Some theorize Toni went there to buy drugs, but those who know her well highly doubt she would have done that. Others theorize she ended up there accidentally and was murdered or sold into human trafficking. Unfortunately, New Jersey is one of the top 10 states in the country for human trafficking. In 2012, Eileen Law said, "I do not know factually that is what happened to Toni, but the more I talk to people, everything plays into that theory." She added that a then recent sighting of Toni in the Midwest was very credible. However, there has been no evidence to point in that direction, only tips. It has been more than 10 years since Toni Lee Sharpless drove off into the warm summer night and vanished without a trace. Her daughter, now an adult, was forced to grow up without her mother to guide her through her teen years. She wasn't there to help her pick out a prom gown or to see her graduate from high school. Donna and Peter Nebel are getting older too. They want to know what happened to their daughter before they pass on. As is always the case, someone out there knows something. Will they do the human thing and end the suffering for Toni's family? Only time will tell.
Number 4.
Alexandria Lowitzer was riding the school bus home from school on the afternoon of April 26, 2010 when she called her mother to tell her that she had forgotten her house key. The 16-year-old, who preferred to be called Ali, also asked if it was okay for her to walk to the burger barn where she worked to pick up her paycheck. Her mother, Joanne, told her not to worry about not having her house key, as her older brother was still at the house, so the door was unlocked. She did not, however, think it was a good idea for Ali to walk to get her paycheck. Although the burger barn was less than a half-mile from their home in Spring, Texas, Ali had never walked there before. She only recently started working there, and her grandmother had always driven her. It was a short walk, but there were no sidewalks along the main road Ali would have to take to get there. Like most teenagers, Ali could be very persistent. She pleaded with her mother, assuring her that she would be careful. She also wanted to see if there was a possibility of her picking up a shift at the burger barn that night so she could make some extra money. Ali had only been working at the burger barn for 5 weeks, and it was her first job. She liked the idea of being able to make her own spending money. Joanne finally relented, telling Ali to text her if she ended up staying at work, so Joanne would know what time Ali needed a ride home that evening. Ali promised her mother that she would check in with her later. Ali got off the school bus at her normal stop on Low Ridge Road around 3 p.m. The surveillance camera on the bus showed her and 2 male classmates exiting the bus there, then heading off in different directions. The boys went directly to their homes, while Ali turned off Low Ridge Road and headed in the direction of the Burger Barn, located near the corner of Cypresswood Drive and Treeshwig Road. Her classmates would be the last people to report seeing Ali that day, as she never made it to work and she never returned home. Joanne got home from work around 5:30 p.m. that evening and was surprised to find the house empty. Since she hadn't heard anything from Ali, she had assumed the teenager had simply picked up her paycheck and returned home. She sent her a text message asking if she had been able to pick up a shift at work, but got no response. Assuming that Ali was busy at work and didn't have immediate access to her phone, Joanne wasn't too worried. When she didn't hear back from Ali, she decided to drive to the Burger Barn at 9 p.m. That was the time that Ali was normally finished working in the evening, but when Joanne went to the restaurant that night, it was already dark and empty. There was no sign of Ali or any other employees. It was apparent that they had already closed up and gone home. Starting to panic, Joanne continued to call Ali's cell phone while driving around the neighborhood trying to think of places where she might be. Ali, though she had a large circle of friends, rarely went to their homes. She preferred to invite friends to her own home, and it was unusual for her to be away from home this late at night. Joanne continued driving around for about an hour, then returned home to look for Ali there. The house was dark and quiet, and Joanne was certain something was wrong. She and Ali's father, John Lowitzer, had recently divorced, but he lived nearby. Joanne called him to see if perhaps he had heard from Ali, but he was as mystified as Joanne. The two of them decided that it was time to get the police involved. John joined Joanne at the house and was there with her when a patrol deputy from the Harris County Constable's office responded to Joanne's 911 call. It was close to midnight when the deputy arrived, and she didn't appear too concerned. She asked a few basic questions about Ali and took a quick look around the teenager's bedroom. She asked John and Joanne if there had been any kind of argument with Ali earlier that day, but Joanne was adamant that everything had been normal. Ali had initially been annoyed that Joanne wouldn't allow her to walk to the Burger Barn, but Joanne had relented, and Ali had been fine when they ended their conversation that afternoon. The deputy tried to assure the worried parents that Ali was probably just acting like a typical teenager and would likely return shortly. She told them to call the police back in the morning if they still hadn't heard from her. John and Joanne weren't pleased with the flippant attitude of the deputy, but there was little they could do. Ali's brother, Mason, called some of his friends, and they spent the night driving around the area looking for the teenager. Joanne continued calling around to Ali's friends, but no one had seen her since school had ended earlier that day. By 5 a.m., there was still no sign of Ali. Joanne knew that something had to be desperately wrong, and John agreed with her. At 9 a.m., they called the police once again, trying to convince them that the situation was serious. They did not believe that Ali was a runaway, as all of her things were still in her room. The only things she had with her when she got off the school bus had been her cell phone and her backpack. Her purse, money, and all of her clothing and makeup remained in her room at home. John and Joanne were obviously in distress, but police were still not convinced. They believed that Ali was a runaway and would return home when she was ready, and they refused to open a missing person case. Realizing they were wasting their time, Ali's frustrated parents decided to start investigating on their own. After speaking with the school bus company, Joanne learned that each bus was equipped with a video surveillance system. She and John were able to view the footage, which showed that Ali had been on the bus when she had last spoken to her mother, and she had gotten off at her normal bus stop. They noticed that two of her classmates got off at the same bus stop and spoke with them to see if they could recall anything that might have happened after the bus pulled away. The boys explained that they had each headed for home, but Ali had walked off, alone, in the opposite direction. Now that he was certain that Ali had at least started walking in the direction of the burger barn, John drove there and spoke to the manager who had been working the previous afternoon. He told John that he had not seen Ali at all during his shift, and she had not come in to pick up her paycheck, which was still sitting in the office. It appeared that Ali had never made it to the burger barn. Noticing that there was a gas station across the street from the restaurant with a surveillance camera, John went there next and asked to view the footage recorded the previous day. Ali would have had to walk right past the gas station's camera in order to get to the burger barn, but there was no sign of her on the film. This backed up the manager's statement that he hadn't seen Ali the previous day. It was clear that she had never made it to the shopping center where the burger barn was located. Somewhere between the bus stop and the restaurant, Ali had disappeared. Joanne was able to get Ali's phone records, and she learned that she had not been the last person to hear from Ali on the day she went missing. After speaking with her mother at 2:45 p.m., Ali had sent a text to a male friend. She asked him if he wanted to come over later that day if she didn't have to work, but he told her he was busy. John followed up with this friend, but it was clear that he had not had any further contact with Ali after their text message exchange, and he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Ali's phone showed her last location as being right on the outskirts of her own neighborhood, near where she got off the bus. It was as if she had vanished as soon as she turned the corner to start her walk to the burger barn. Unsure what else they could do, and aware that the police were still convinced Ali had run away from home, the family reached out to the Laura Recovery Center, a non-profit group that worked to prevent kidnappings and help recover lost and abducted children. The group made official missing person flyers and helped the family distribute them around the area. The family also offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to the location of Ali. The Laura Recovery Center also helped the family organize large-scale ground searches in the area where Ali was last seen and worked to get the case publicized by the local news media. By the end of May, the case had attracted enough attention that the police were forced to take notice. Harris County Constable deputies had taken the initial report, but the case was now handed over to the Harris County Sheriff's Office. Within hours, there were homicide detectives knocking on Joanne's front door. The family was pleased that the case was finally going to be taken seriously, but it also meant that they themselves would be under a lot of scrutiny. Homicide detectives always start their investigation closest to home. As Ali's father, John was initially looked at with some suspicion and was interrogated for hours. They also took a hard look at Ali's older brother, Mason, who had been home alone when Ali got off the school bus on the day she disappeared. He was also subject to hours of interrogation. He told police that he had heard the school bus dropping students off, but was adamant that Ali had never come to the house that day. He left to go to work shortly after that and never saw his younger sister. Joanne, John, and Mason were all given polygraph examinations, and detectives determined that each of them were being truthful. Joanne and John were cleared of any involvement in Ali's disappearance. Although Mason passed a polygraph, detectives did not officially clear him as they still couldn't completely account for his whereabouts at the time his sister went missing. Mason has always maintained he had nothing to do with the disappearance, and he was never named a suspect. There was nothing about Ali that indicated she would have run away from home. She had been doing well during her sophomore year at Spring High School, and she was well behaved and never got into any kind of trouble. She played on a softball team, was a Girl Scout, and had been excited about finally being old enough to have a job. She was very artistic, and although she liked to dress in dark clothing with a lot of dark eyeliner, there was nothing dark about her personality. She enjoyed making people laugh and loved to sing in her high school choir. Ali was a very social girl who liked to stay in touch with her friends, but she preferred to do so from the comfort of her own room. Before she went missing, she had used her cell phone frequently, usually sending thousands of text messages a month back and forth with her friends. None of them could imagine Ali simply deciding to run away, and none of her friends have heard from her since she disappeared. Her phone went silent that day, never being used after 2:50 p.m. Joanne and John have been relentless in their quest to find their daughter. Although they had been grateful that police had finally launched a serious investigation to find out what had happened to Ali, they were not going to stop their own investigation. Instead, they hired a private investigator and have continued their search for Ali. The private investigator theorized that Ali had been a victim of human trafficking, and police have considered this as well. Detectives have never found any evidence to indicate that Ali is no longer living. Although her case has been assigned to the homicide department, this was done as a matter of policy as she has been missing with few leads coming in about her location. They continue to search for Ali and believe that there are people who know what happened to her and have the information police need to solve this case. Alexandria Lowitzer was 16 years old when she went missing in 2010. She has blue eyes and brown hair, and at the time of her disappearance, she was 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 145 pounds. She was last seen wearing a white t-shirt, black and white checkered skinny jeans, a gray hooded sweatshirt that zipped up the front, and black sneakers. She was carrying a multicolored checkered backpack and a blue LG cell phone. She had pink braces on her top and bottom teeth, and her nose and ears were pierced. If you have any information about Ali, please call the Harris County Sheriff's Office at 713-221-6000 or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678.
Number 5.
Angela Jaramillo has been missing since January 23, 2010. The young girl was only 16 years old at the time of her disappearance. She was last seen leaving a party in Dallas, Texas around 2 a.m. Angela never returned home and has never been seen or heard from again. The previous evening, Angela left her family's home around 11:30 p.m. to attend the party. At some point during the night, she sent a text message to her mother to ask if she could spend the night at a friend's house. Angela's mother agreed. It is believed that Angela left the party to go to her friend's house, but she never arrived. The next morning, Angela's mother called said friend after she was unable to reach Angela. The friend explained that she had not shown up. Angela's mother then called the boy who hosted the party. He explained that Angela had left his house around 2 in the morning and he had not heard from her since then. Angela was reported missing shortly thereafter. Prior to her disappearance, Angela did not have a history of running away. She had an active social life and played both soccer and volleyball for her school. Despite this, police initially classified Angela as a runaway. Then, at some later point, Angela's cell phone was found in a local park. After that, investigators changed their tune and began to explore the possibility of foul play. Around the same time the phone was found, investigators also stated that they found some unspecified evidence that Angela might have been injured. They have never elaborated on that evidence. Years passed without any news about Angela's case. Then, during October 2013, it was reported that a few different people had seen someone matching Angela's description in the Arcadia Park area. After these reported sightings, Angela's mother announced that she believed Angela had run away to prove a point. If the person cited was in fact Angela, she would be over 18 at that point, with no legal obligation to return home. However, investigators were never able to confirm that the sightings were legitimate. Angela's case has since grown cold again. Angela remains missing today. If you have any information that could lead to her whereabouts, please go here to submit an anonymous tip.
Number 6.
The baffling mystery has carried on for 10 years, and it doesn't seem as if investigators in Henrico, Virginia are any closer to discovering what happened to Arianna Davis. There didn't seem to be anything irregular about April 30, 2010, when the 21-year-old left her home and made her way to the J Express Mart on 9 Mile Road. It was just a 3-block walk for Arianna, but for some peculiar reason, she never returned. Since that day, no one has seen or heard from Arianna Davis. She left her identification and keys at home because it was expected that she would quickly return. Reports state that Arianna made it to her destination and purchased a black and mild cigar from the clerk sometime around 1:15 to 1:30 p.m. She left the store and was spotted walking down Coke Avenue, and authorities stated that witnesses claimed there was nothing unusual about Arianna's behavior. She was just 6 weeks away from graduating from a massage therapy program in college, and from all accounts, Arianna was excited about her future. Arianna Davis lived at home with her parents at the time of her disappearance and had never stayed away from home for long. She hadn't even spent a night away from home and was so close to her family that she would contact her parents if she would be away for longer than an hour. It is highly uncharacteristic for her not to return, so it's unimaginable what her loved ones have endured for the last decade. It's reported that Arianna didn't have a car of her own and would use public transportation, so it wasn't believed that she somehow drove off. She was said to have been seen with a man around the store that she visited, and while it hasn't been stated that the unknown man is a suspect in Arianna's disappearance, this man was later arrested and sentenced for stabbing a woman. At the time of her disappearance, Arianna Davis stood 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 200 pounds. She had black dark brown straight, shoulder-length hair and brown eyes. Both of her ears are pierced. Arianna was last seen wearing blue rolled-up cut-off jeans, a pink shirt, and multicolored flip-flops. Her hair was reportedly pulled back in a wrap with a pink and white hair clip. Her middle name is Ivane, and her nickname is Peaches. Anyone with information regarding this case is urged to contact the Henrico police at 804-501-5000 and ask for investigator K.S. Howdyshell, Crime Stoppers at 804-780-1000, or their local authorities. Please share this story about Arianna Davis to help her family learn what happened to her that day. She is our sister and her life matters.
Number 7.
For our next post, we jump forward nearly 5 years from Anne-Marie Burr's disappearance. This case is also quite different from Anne-Marie's in many ways. First, 2 young women were attacked at the same time. Second, the attack occurred in their home, and they were not taken from the premises. And third, there was a survivor of the attack. So, is this case evidence of Ted Bundy slowly growing comfortable in his violence, or is he being blamed for someone else's misdeeds simply because he is a sensational figure and nearby at the time? Let's explore. There is very little information publicly available about Lonnie Trumbull online. We know that she was born in 1946, and she was 20 years old when her life was taken from her in 1966. We know that she had recently graduated from flight attendant school, though at the time, it was called stewardess school. To get through training like that, someone would have to be social and at least somewhat outgoing. We know that Lonnie lived with 2 other flight attendants at the time of her murder. These sparse facts are all that remains of a life taken too soon. On June 23, 1966, Lonnie Trumbull and her roommate Lisa Wick were attacked in their apartment. Lisa made it out alive. Lonnie was not so lucky. Sometime in the early hours of June 23, 1966, Lonnie Trumbull and Lisa Wick were beaten with a blunt object while they slept in their beds. The time is speculated to be around midnight, based on the last known contact with either of the women and the fact that a neighbor saw a car speeding away from the apartment building at 12:15 a.m. The scene lay undisturbed until Joyce, who had been away from the apartment for the night, returned home around 9:30 a.m. She found the door unlocked and the lights left on, which made her hesitate outside the apartment door and call for her roommates. When she was met with only silence, she entered the apartment and found the bloody scene. Both Lonnie's and Lisa's pillows were drenched with blood, and the walls near their heads were splattered as well. Understandably terrified, Joyce ran from the apartment and sought help from her landlord, who called the police to report the incident. Upon examination of the scene, Lisa was found to be alive, but barely. She was rushed to the hospital for critical care and ended up surviving. Lonnie, unfortunately, was dead on arrival. Lonnie's autopsy and an examination on Lisa showed that neither woman had been sexually assaulted. The investigation of the scene yielded a few clues. There were no signs of forced entry, so either the door had been left unlocked or the lock was flimsy enough to pick without leaving any evidence behind. There were several fingerprints and a full palm print that were left by the perpetrator. The murder weapon, a 1.5-foot long piece of wood stained with blood, was found in a vacant lot nearby. It was found alongside a girdle that had belonged to one of the women, linking it to the scene. Besides this girdle, the women's flight attendant bags were stashed near this vacant lot as well. Nothing else was apparently missing from the apartment, including expensive items. This effectively rules out robbery as a motive. Police theorized that the perpetrator was someone one or both of the young women knew, based on the level of brutality. With this theory in mind, police began seeking out suspects. They questioned nearly 100 people who knew Lonnie and Lisa, polygraphing more than a few. They followed tips to dead ends, had favorite suspects whose histories are lost to time. Suspects were cleared by alibi or by passing a polygraph. As Lisa recovered and her memory of the night came back to her, she worked with the police to make a composite sketch. The sketch resulted in no substantial leads. There's only one suspect that came up during the investigation that seems plausible. The son of the apartment owner died by suicide shortly after the attack, and newspaper clippings regarding the attack and his belongings. Ted Bundy was not considered a suspect until Robert Keppel, a detective on the Bundy murder cases, began comparing the nuances of the crime scene with Bundy's known crimes. Specifically, Keppel pointed out similarities to the Chi Omega sorority attack that Bundy would perpetrate in 1978. The victims in that case were also home sleeping and beaten with a blunt object. When Keppel pressed Bundy about the attack on Lisa and Lonnie, he denied he had been involved. In later years, Lisa Wick, the surviving victim from this attack, contacted Ann Rule, the author of The Stranger Beside Me. Lisa allegedly confided in Rule that the sight of Bundy's eyes deeply disturbed her and told Rule that she believed Bundy to have been her attacker. Bundy was 19 years old at the time of the attack and living at his parents' Tacoma home. Now, being 19 would perhaps have given him the physical strength to brutally attack two women, but I'm hesitant to assume a 19-year-old would have the confidence and force to contain and control two women. Bundy's finger and palm prints were also not a match to those found at the scene, having been tested in 1977, but keep in mind that the scene was far from secure and fingerprinting was not nearly as nuanced in the 1970s as it is now. It's possible that Ted Bundy was truly Lonnie Trumbull's murderer and Lisa Wick's attacker, but we are far from having enough evidence to definitively say that. The Mo matches up with Bundy, but is also very common, unfortunately. Nothing about this investigation singles out Bundy, unfortunately. I think this boils down to what we discussed in the last post. The world feels a little safer when there is one sensational serial killer that was already caught, rather than so many people who killed once and are still out there because they were never caught. The bottom line on my thoughts: could it have been Bundy? Sure. Do I think it was him based on the evidence? There isn't enough provided for me to favor this theory over any others. I could not find any information about what jurisdiction this case falls under. Based on what we know about the case, I have come up with one avenue that will allow you to reach out if you think you may know something that could spark movement in Lonnie and Lisa's case. You can submit tips to Crime Stoppers of Puget Sound, which covers the greater Seattle area, by calling 800-222-8477. Lonnie and Lisa both deserve justice, and they have been waiting far too long.